Are you looking for a healthy way to boost your energy levels, improve your mood, and support your overall health? Spoiler alert. I already know the answer is yes, and that's why I'm telling you about Goli Vitamins. Goli is a leading brand of gummy vitamins that are made with all natural ingredients and free of artificial flavors, colors, and sweeteners. Plus, they're vegan and gluten-free. Goli vitamins are perfect for people of all ages and lifestyles. Busy parent, college student, bodybuilder, does not matter. Goli can help you feel your best. With Goli vitamins, you can finally get the energy, focus, and support you need to live your best life. Get 10% off your first order when you visit Goli.com and use the code PODMOM at checkout. Feel your best naturally and reach your goals with Goli. Welcome to the Relationship Review Podcast. Our goal for each episode is to figure out why and how our relationships make us who we are. I'm your host, Edison Westbrook, and I'm excited to be back for Season 4 and these very interesting topics. Most of all, I'm glad you're here, and I hope you find this episode helpful. This is the Relationship Review. Hello and welcome. You're listening to the Relationship Review Podcast. It's been a little while. We're back for Season 4 and I'm very excited. This season, we're going to focus on intra and interpersonal communication and the effect it has on our day-to-day lives so that we can set the right tone for the discussions we're going to have this season. On this episode, we have to start by breaking down interpersonal versus intrapersonal communication. People tend to think that the terms interpersonal and intrapersonal are interchangeable, but they really aren't. They're opposites. Interpersonal means between two or more people. Intrapersonal is between you and yourself. They are both important communication styles that we utilize all the time in the professional and personal parts of our daily lives. Interpersonal communication helps you tell a story, share an idea or an experience, simply talk to other people. Your intrapersonal communication helps you make plans, visualize your future, set goals, and connect with your own sense of self. Sometimes, probably in most cases, a person is going to be stronger in one type versus the other. The key is to take time and develop both, almost in the same way that some people are extremely extroverted while others are very, very introverted. Usually, a person strikes a balance between the two. Interpersonal communication is what happens when you interact with other people, whether it's face-to-face, online, over the phone, in a letter. If you are interacting with someone else, that is interpersonal communication. Your interpersonal communication is not just what you say. It's also your body language. And this is what gets me in trouble. It's your disposition, your attitude, your mood. All those things contribute to how you communicate with other people because people can see your expressions. They can hear your tone of voice, read what's happening. I'm sure you've heard people say, you can read a person, you can read the situation, like, hey, read the room. The way that it happens is through what you're not saying. Are you nodding your head, crossing your arms, raising your eyebrow, turning your nose up, smirking, smiling? All those things are your interpersonal communication style. And it's what allows people to fully understand what you're expressing and what you're trying to convey. In the same way that it allows you to understand the full range of another person's feelings and emotions and how they're tied into what they're saying verbally. We are relying on so many context clues while we're engaging in interpersonal communication that there's a high level of misunderstanding that takes place when people are trying to get their ideas across. So, this might be something you face when you're reading an email. You can't figure out exactly what the tone was. Like, yes, you see the words, but what was the tone? Like, how are they saying this to me? This also happens a lot in text messages. So that's why people have gotten into the habit of using emojis to convey the emotion that they want you to understand from the text. It's very easy to read into the words that you're seeing if there's no context to give you some direction on how things are being said. It's also the reason that when we ask someone, is everything okay? And they say, yeah, everything's fine. Then we usually know that it may not be the case, that everything is really fine because of the context clues they're giving us with their posture, facial expression. All those are components that make up interpersonal communication. So intrapersonal communication is what happens when you are thinking and talking to yourself. I like to think of it in terms of intravenous. We're getting an IV or something. When you go to the doctor, they're going to give it to you intravenously, which means inside your body, inside your veins. Are you a list maker? Do you keep a journal? Do you hype yourself up with a pep talk, like when you're getting ready in the morning? Before you make a big decision, do you say, you know what, I'm going to take time to sleep on it. I'm going to let the idea rest with me. In addition to your thoughts, intrapersonal communication includes the way you contemplate what's going on, or like how are you assessing the situation. Your self-concept, or how you see yourself, your beliefs and values, your attitudes and presumptions, all these things make up your intrapersonal communication style. That self-evaluation that, really we're going through constantly all day, every day. It determines how you're going to act with the outside world. Your perception of what is happening around you can also be a huge factor in your intrapersonal communication. It has a lot to do with the expectations that you set for yourself. What are the interpersonal communications? So we're back to interpersonal communication skills that you use on a daily basis. It's going to be your communication, whether that is verbal or nonverbal, or if you're speaking publicly. Collaboration. How do you work with a team? Can you negotiate? Do you have leadership skills? Are you empathetic? How do you navigate conflict? The most important component really is, how well do you listen? Active listening is one of the most critical interpersonal skills. Do you listen? Do you observe? Are you actively paying attention to all those other context clues that people are giving you when they're communicating with you? And on the other side, how is your intrapersonal communication? Do you treat yourself with respect? I saw a post online recently that said, the most important person you talk to every day is yourself. And that stuck with me because it has taken a lot of growth and self-awareness for me to realize how harshly I speak to myself sometimes and how I truthfully perceive myself. Outwardly, I like to think that I'm coming off as confident and self-aware, but internally, I can speak very harshly to myself if I'm not meeting the expectations that I have set for me. One of the ways that I've been able to get more internally mindful and better connected to the ability to show myself compassion has been through meditation. I believe in the spiritual technology of prayer, but I had to learn the difference between prayer and meditation. I had never learned how to meditate. We're in the digital age, and I downloaded an app. I use the app pretty much every night when I'm falling asleep. I have started to use it when I'm transitioning from one space or one energy into another. If I'm on the drive home from the office, I'll do a 5-minute meditation so that I don't carry any frustrations or whatever the case into my home life. I want to give that moment what it needs and then move on. So the guided meditation really helps with that. And there's so many. There's ones for waking up, taking a break, for rejuvenating yourself throughout the day, and for falling into restful sleep at night. And some of them are just the sounds of nature, which can also be comforting and helpful and help give you a sense of inner calm, inner quiet. That reminds me, one of our favorite family movies when my kids were younger was Kung Fu Panda. Po, the panda, was under the leadership of Master Shifu. Master Shifu was responsible for training elite warriors to be premium fighters, the Furious Five. The most important skill he taught them was how to center themselves and find inner peace. There is no better type of communication when you're thinking about intrapersonal versus interpersonal. It helps to think of these two styles as a yin and yang, which should strike a harmonious balance in our lives. Now you may be wondering why I think so much about communication, which makes this a good time for me to introduce myself officially, which I don't know if I've ever really done in all the seasons of this podcast. But anyway, my name is Edison Westbrook. Communications is what I do for a living. I am the director of communications at a small nonprofit organization. And earlier this summer, I started my own business as a consultant to help nonprofits with their development strategy. That means fundraising. Also with, as I'm sure you can guess, their communications, which is the marketing, how they engage board members, planning events, creating partnerships with sponsors and local businesses. I have worked with churches, community organizations, and a university. And if I had to take a drink every time I use the word communications in a day, you know what? Anyway, the other component of my background that makes me so interested in communications and how they impact our relationships is psychology. The summer that I was about 15, I went to a camp for kids who wanted to learn more about the law. It was a fantastic experience. We took field trips, the courthouse, police station. I was very interested in the case studies and reading about crimes that had happened where I lived and getting kind of a background that you don't see on the evening news. I thought, okay, this is it. This is what I want to do. Then in my senior year of high school, I took a psychology class that really steered me in a different direction. More than prosecuting or defending criminal actions, I was really intrigued by the behavior that caused crime in the first place. I wanted to get to the bottom of what leads people to act violently towards others. Long before podcasting was a thing, before we created the genre that is now true crime, my ultimate goal was to have my own radio talk show, like Frasier Crane, to discuss crimes and their impact on victims, survivors, and society. I have totally dated myself with that Frasier reference. If you know, you know. Frasier was top tier television. So I was ready and set to go into psychology, more specifically criminology. This is what I'm doing. Then I had to do an observation in a domestic violence shelter. In most battered women's shelters, and actually, I don't know if that is still politically correct to say, in domestic violence shelters, there is a high level of security and anonymity in place to protect the women who are escaping violence and life-threatening situations, being abused by their romantic partners. Some of them, under the threat of harm, had to leave their children behind with abusive husbands and boyfriends or other family members, and the stakes were always high. Staff was always on alert, because every so often there's instances of angry partners who would show up and cause friction, especially when they're faced with abruptly becoming single parents in a woman's absence. One of the most important rules was that no one was supposed to give out the location of the shelter. I had to do this observation for about 4 or 5 weeks while I was there, I had the opportunity to hear several women's stories of what they had endured and survived and what finally gave them the courage to leave. The students and volunteers would help staff to prepare dinner for the women. And that was, that was actually where I learned about those boxes of frozen banquet fried chicken. I don't even know if they still make that, but it was delish, coming like hot out of the oven. Okay, anyway, I never felt unsafe at the shelter. The doors were locked at all times, and I just had this admiration for the women who were of all backgrounds and various ages, the staff who had dedicated their lives to helping. I always knew the situation was serious, but I just thought everything was okay. Close to the end of my observations, so probably in week 4, I guess, we had an incident at the shelter that really changed the course of my life. One of the newer clients was getting out of a very dangerous situation with a very dangerous man. He was her husband. This shelter was only open in the evenings for women to come in and have a hot meal and a safe place to sleep. They went out during the day because a lot of them still had jobs. They still wanted to see their children if they were staying with other family members. So they're making the best of this situation. This newer client was going to see her very small baby that she wasn't allowed to take with her when she left, who was being cared for by her mother-in-law. The mother-in-law would come pick this client up from nearby because the woman didn't want to give away the location of the shelter. She would take her, let her spend time with the baby, and then drop her back off in the vicinity before lockdown at dinner. Even though the mother-in-law, the husband's mother, had promised she would not, for whatever reason, and this was a violent man, so it could have been that she felt threatened as well. She told her son the area where the shelter was, where the woman was going, and he figured it out. He showed up at the door, armed, demanding that either she come out or he come in, and if he didn't get his way, he was going to start shooting people. This was before what we now experience as like mass shooter culture. When I say the shelter went on lockdown, it's not going to sound like much now because kids' schools go on lockdown. Offices have to prepare for scenarios of armed people coming in to do harm. This is how we live now. At that time, it was very much not. I was terrified. We went on lockdown and shelter in place until the police arrived, with this man standing outside, yelling at the top of his lungs, threatening violence on everyone. By the time the police got there, the guy was gone. But they came in to take reports and get everybody's statement and to get the client's home address so they could follow up with her husband. When it was time for me and the other students and volunteers to leave, we were all shaken. I definitely didn't feel safe walking out of that shelter and having to go take public transportation back to my campus. To add a bit of context, around this same time that this happened, there had been a story in the news about a girl who was my age who had turned down the advances of a young man who was trying to get her phone number. He shot her in the face, simply said, no, thank you, like I'm good. And he took her life. By this time in my life, I had to learn ways to stay safe against the sometimes aggressive interest of guys who were extremely persistent when asking for your phone number. And I'm sure that 9 out of 10 women who hear this will be able to relate because it's just a reality. So you have to come up with ways to say no, but also stay very polite, because saying no thank you sometimes is not an option. I had actually memorized the number to a payphone that I passed every day so that I could give it out instead of my real number. And that way, if anyone called, who, thought they had gotten my phone number, they would be calling a technically working and ringing number. But if I saw the person again, I could just say, oh, you know what? I'm just so busy. I'm never in my room. Sorry. I sometimes wore a ring on my left hand, but that wasn't fooling anybody because I looked 12. Although I was able to sometimes say, oh, I'm living my life for Christ and married to my faith. And that actually worked better than anything else I tried. They don't care if you have a boyfriend, if you got a husband, if you're celibate, you just, it doesn't matter what you say. But when you bring Christ into the conversation, it tends to change minds. So hearing about a young woman being murdered for not wanting to date a guy would have been shocking for me no matter what, since I could very closely relate to how cautious young women needed to be when rejecting a man. But this shooting happened at a discount movie theater that I had gone to on several occasions with my friends, just right out on the sidewalk, because you'd walk up to the ticket booth, which was off the sidewalk in the city, get your tickets and go in the theater. And that's where he killed her in the face for saying, no, thank you. I don't want to give you my number. Very close to that time frame, I had been followed off the train and across my campus by an intense and aggressive young man who would not leave me alone or take no for an answer. He asked if he could have my phone number. I said no. He offered to walk me home from the train because it was the evening and he wanted me to be, quote unquote, safe. I said no, thank you. He fell back while we were still on the train. When I got off, he got off after me and started to follow me. I was aware of his presence, but I didn't want to seem like I was, nervous or shaken in any way. And I also did not want to walk this man to my front door. Even though you had to have a key card to get into the dorms, I still didn't want him knowing where I lived. So as I was making my way through campus, I saw a security guard parked on the street, and I just walked right on over to his driver's side and tapped on the window and asked for help. And as soon as I pointed the guy out, he did a really quick about face and disappeared in the other direction. When I went back to the shelter, I learned that the man who had been standing outside threatening harm against everyone, which was kind of downplayed a little when the police arrived and said like, oh, they're going through a situation. We've seen this before. He's just very angry. He's having a bad day. That man had stalked his wife and shot her, and then he killed himself. She survived and was able to remain on earth with her child. The experience changed some of the procedures at the shelter, and it made me think very long and hard about whether these kinds of situations and the constant exposure to the worst stories about the terrible ways that people can treat each other was something I could handle. I have had people say to me, well, if that was your passion, you would have stuck with it. Or to suggest that I would somehow have learned to deal with that trauma, or to just get used to hearing stories of the most extreme violence. I think that as consumers of news, or now true crime stories, we are always several steps removed from the stories we hear about. And the removal sanitizes the situation, which is actually a grace and a blessing. There are sounds, smells, and emotions that are imprinted in you and on you when you go through the terror of experiencing violence or even the threat of violence firsthand. Those kinds of experiences change the conversations that you have with yourself about whether you can trust the world you live in. I was having nightmares, and I didn't feel safe walking around. After self-reflection, I realized that I could still use my experience and stay true to my interests, but also lean into helping others by focusing on nonprofit work. I know you forgot that's where we were going, but we're back. Since nonprofits do the extremely important work of organizing social engagement to help meet the needs of the community, I still hear difficult stories of people's survival. Most of all, though, I've felt encouraged and inspired. Now you may be saying, what does psychology have to do with communications, especially fundraising? It feels like a stretch and a reach, but it's not. There's a lot of psychology involved in philanthropy, really in business of any kind, absolutely on social media, and of course in our relationships. Psychology is the science of mind and behavior. It's considered the knowledge of the soul. I have seen how essential communication is in the relationships we build with others and internally. I've been married for almost 2 decades. I'm a mother and a sister. I have so much extended family and some very dear friends. That is a lot of relationships. In my experience, navigating relationships and communications with the people in your personal life can be just as complex as it can be rewarding. You may be saying, well, a person who is super interested in relationships and communication has to be really good at relationships and communication. I have my days, just like everybody else. Trying to understand like the concepts of why things are happening does not make you better at the application. I definitely have room to grow and lots to learn. And one thing I do is ask questions that hopefully help us understand our own communication skills, how to improve them, how to better understand the people we're interacting with, and build stronger relationships. This season on the podcast, we're going to take a look at conflict resolution, figuring out your conflict style, how to handle criticism and manage emotions in difficult situations, how to set and maintain relationship goals, and what purpose does jealousy serve? Many of those answers will come from reflecting on our relationships with ourselves. How do I set boundaries, take care of myself physically and mentally? What are my sources of support and my coping mechanisms? And how do I communicate effectively with myself? We'll look at all these topics and more in season 4. Thank you so much for tuning in. If you made it this far, please know how much I appreciate you. I want to hear from you. When you visit our website, relationshipreviewpodcast.com, and subscribe to receive our emails, you will be invited to take a 1-minute relationship survey that helps us decide on future topics for the show. This episode is proudly sponsored by Edison Westbrook Consulting. We help nonprofit organizations amplify their impact with the power of communications. Visit edisonwestbrook.net for more information and a free consultation. Remember to be kind to others and be good to yourself. Until next time, this is the Relationship Review. The Relationship Review podcast is an independent and original production created by me, Edison Westbrook. Our goal is to unlock more meaningful connections in our relationships by learning more about what makes us who we are. If you enjoyed this episode and love the show, you can help others find it by giving us a review or a rating on Apple Podcasts. If you found the episode helpful, please share it with a friend. This episode was produced by Coca and published on Spotify. We appreciate our sources and contributors to this episode, especially those of you who have written to share stories with us. If you have a comment, a question, or a suggestion, send us an email to relationshipreviewpodcast@gmail.com. As always, we are most grateful for you. If you want to help us grow the show, please consider supporting our work. Go to Relationship Review Podcast and click support for more information.